And the judge's reaction. Absolutely brutal. It was supposed to be one of those small, satisfying moments that mark a turning point in life, the kind you replay in your head when things get stressful. I had just bought my brand new car a few days earlier. Not new to me, but actually new. Fresh paint. That clean interior smell. Not a scratch anywhere. I parked it carefully in my driveway every night, sometimes even glancing out the window before bed just to admire it. In my mind, it represented stability, progress, and the reward for years of hard work. That evening was completely ordinary. I came home from work, parked the car in its usual spot, locked it, and went inside. The neighborhood was quiet and that eerie. HOA-controlled way trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and the unspoken rule that nothing ever really happens there. I remember thinking how safe the area felt. We had an HOA, cameras on several houses, and neighbors who loved to watch everything like it was a full-time job. If there was one place a car should be safe, it was here. The next morning, I woke up early, coffee in hand, already mentally planning my day. As usual, I glanced out the front window and froze. The driveway was empty. At first, my brain refused to process it. I stared for a few seconds, convinced I was still half asleep. I even blinked and leaned closer to the glass, as if the car might suddenly reappear if I focused hard enough. It didn't. I stepped outside barefoot, scanning the street, looking left and right like maybe I had parked somewhere else by mistake. Neighbors. Cars were exactly where they always were. Mine was the only one missing. That's when the panic hit. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and a dozen thoughts raced through my head all at once. Had it been towed? Stolen? Was this some HOA nightmare where I missed a notice taped to my door? I checked my phone, no alerts, no emails, no warnings. I ran back inside and grabbed my keys, pressing the lock button out of pure desperation, hoping to hear a familiar beep somewhere nearby. Nothing. Just silence and the distant sound of a lawn sprinkler turning on. I called the non-emergency police line, my voice shaky as I explained that my car was missing from my driveway. As I waited, I felt that sick mix of anger and helplessness that comes when something you worked hard for disappears without explanation. The operator asked routine questions: make, model, color, plate number, and told me an officer would be dispatched. While waiting, I started walking around the neighborhood, asking a couple of early rising neighbors if they'd seen anything unusual. Most shrugged. One said they heard a car late at night but didn't think much of it. Another gave me that look, half curious, half entertained, like my problem was the most exciting thing that had happened all week. Standing there, looking at my empty driveway under the morning sun, I had no idea that this was only the beginning. At that moment, I still believed this was a simple theft, something insurance would handle, something stressful but straightforward. I had no clue that the situation would spiral into accusations, legal threats, and one of the most absurd HOA dramas I'd ever experienced. All I knew was that my brand new car was gone, and whatever happened next was going to change how I looked at my neighbors forever. By the time the police arrived, the initial shock had started to harden into anger. I walked them through everything when I last saw the car, where it was parked, and the fact that there had been no HOA notices or tow warnings. One officer asked the obvious question: any cameras nearby? That was when it clicked. Of course there were cameras. This neighborhood practically ran on them. Everyone had at least one. Some had entire systems covering the street like a low-budget surveillance network. I started with my own doorbell camera. Scrolling back through the footage felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel instead of my own. The night played out quietly at first: empty street, porch lights glowing, nothing unusual. Then, just after midnight, movement appeared at the edge of the frame. A figure walked up my driveway with the kind of confidence that immediately felt wrong. They weren't sneaking. They weren't hesitating. They moved like they already knew the car was theirs to take. I paused the video and leaned closer to the screen. The hoodie, the posture, the way the person glanced around it all felt disturbingly casual. A few seconds later, the car lights flashed. My stomach sank. Whoever this was had the keys or knew exactly how to bypass the system. Moments later, the engine started, and my brand new car rolled out of the driveway as smoothly as if I'd been the one driving it. The officer asked me to rewind and play it again. As I did, recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. The walk, the build, even the way the person adjusted their sleeves, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I had seen dozens of times around the neighborhood. HOA Karen's son. Saying it out loud felt surreal. This wasn't some random thief from outside the community. This was the kid who rode his bike up and down the street. The one whose mom was constantly lecturing everyone about rules, noise levels, and community standards. The same woman who loved reminding people that the HOA existed to protect property values. The officers exchanged a look and asked if I was sure. I nodded and pointed out details: his height, his clothes, the direction he walked from. To be certain, we checked another camera, this time from a neighbor across the street. The angle was clearer. There was no denying it. His face was visible under the streetlight for just long enough to erase any doubt. At that point, I expected a knock on a door, maybe an embarrassed apology, or at least a frantic explanation. Instead, what followed was something else entirely. Before the police even left, HOA Karen herself came storming down the sidewalk. She had clearly heard what was going on. This neighborhood thrived on gossip. She didn't ask if my car was okay. She didn't ask what happened. Her first words were defensive, loud, and angry. She insisted there was no way her son would do something like that. She accused the cameras of being misleading, said the footage was out of context, and suggested that maybe I had given him permission and was now trying to blame him. The officers calmly explained what the footage showed. They mentioned witnesses, timestamps, and the fact that multiple cameras told the same story. That's when her tone shifted. Instead of denying it outright, she started minimizing it. Maybe he was just borrowing the car. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe I had left the keys somewhere. Standing there, listening to her rewrite reality in real time, I realized this was not going to be simple. The evidence was clear, but logic didn't seem to matter. What shocked me most wasn't just that her son had taken the car, it was how quickly she turned it into my fault. As the officers made notes and explained the next steps, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just about a stolen car anymore. This was about entitlement, denial, and a neighbor who clearly believed the rules applied to everyone except her family. And somehow, deep down, I knew this confrontation was only setting the stage for something much bigger and much more ridiculous to come. The reality of what had happened didn't fully sink in until later that afternoon, when my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't the police, it was an officer calling to inform me that my car had been located. For a brief second, relief washed over me. Found men intact, or at least that's what I hoped. That illusion shattered the moment they told me where it was. The car had been recovered several miles away, wrapped around a guardrail near an intersection. There were skid marks on the road, debris scattered across the shoulder, and pieces of my car lying in places they were never meant to be. When I arrived at the scene, I almost didn't recognize it as mine at first. The front end was crushed, the hood bent upward like paper, and one of the wheels sat at an angle that made it clear the damage was severe. Standing there, I felt numb. This wasn't just metal and plastic, it was something I had worked hard for. Something I barely had time to enjoy. The officer explained that the driver had lost control at high speed and fled the scene on foot before authorities arrived. That detail alone told me everything I needed to know. Whoever had been behind the wheel knew they were in serious trouble. As the tow truck loaded what was left of my car, I started getting calls and messages. Neighbors wanted updates. Friends were asking if I was okay. And then there was the call I didn't expect: HOA Karen. Her tone was very different now. Gone was the shouting from earlier. Instead, she sounded strained, almost rehearsed. She told me her son had been very shaken, and that the crash had been an unfortunate accident. She emphasized that he was young, that mistakes happen, and that dragging this out would hurt everyone involved. At no point did she actually say sorry. Not for the theft, not for the damage, not for the chaos. The focus was entirely on how hard this was for her family. Insurance quickly entered the picture. And that's when things got even more twisted. My insurer informed me that because the car was taken without permission and involved in a hit and run, the claim would require a full police report and investigation. It wasn't going to be instant. In the meantime, I was without a vehicle, dealing with paperwork, phone calls, and the emotional exhaustion of watching a brand new purchase turn into a legal headache. Meanwhile, HOA Karen began floating a different narrative around the neighborhood. According to her, her son hadn't stolen the car he had, used it briefly. The crash, she implied, was unavoidable. Some neighbors started giving me odd looks, as if they weren't sure who to believe. It was incredible how fast facts became optional once community politics got involved. What pushed everything over the edge was her next move. She suggested casually, almost cheerfully, that I should consider paying for part of the damages. Her reasoning was absurd. If the car hadn't been so powerful, the crash wouldn't have been as bad. If I hadn't parked it so visibly, it wouldn't have tempted her son. Listening to her speak, it was like reality had flipped upside down. The police report made it clear. The vehicle was taken without consent, driven recklessly, and abandoned after the crash. There was no gray area. Yet despite this, she kept insisting that the situation was being blown out of proportion. Standing there with the report in my hand, I realized that logic and evidence weren't going to end this. The crash didn't just destroy my car, it exposed just how far someone was willing to go to avoid responsibility. What should have been a straightforward case of theft and damages had turned into a battle of excuses, blame shifting, and entitlement. And as frustrating as it was, I had a growing sense that this was all building toward an even more unbelievable confrontation, one that would move beyond the street and straight into a courtroom. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more absurd, it did. A few days after the crash, while I was still juggling insurance calls and transportation issues, I received a thick envelope in the mail. At first, I assumed it was more paperwork related to the police report or my insurance claim. Instead, it was a formal legal notice. HOA Karen was suing me. I reread the first page several times, convinced I had misunderstood something. According to the lawsuit, she was claiming damages related to emotional distress, negligent behavior, and even loss of property use. Somehow, in her version of reality, I was responsible for the stress her family endured after her son stole and wrecked my car. The logic was so twisted it almost felt like satire. What made it worse was how confidently it was written. The document painted me as reckless and irresponsible. It claimed I had created an unsafe environment by owning a vehicle that was attractive to young drivers. It even suggested that by parking my car in my own driveway, I had indirectly encouraged her son's actions. Reading it, I felt a mix of disbelief and anger boiling over. This wasn't just denial anymore, this was a calculated attempt to shift blame through legal intimidation. I contacted a lawyer immediately, half expecting them to laugh. Instead, they sighed and told me they'd seen this kind of behavior before. Not common, but not unheard of either. Some people, when cornered by evidence, don't retreat, they attack. Filing a lawsuit, even a baseless one, was a way for her to regain control and pressure me into backing down. Meanwhile, she wasted no time spreading her narrative. Neighbors started acting differently. Conversations stopped when I walked by. A few people subtly hinted that maybe things went too far, and that I should consider settling to keep the peace. It was surreal watching public opinion bend under the weight of confidence rather than facts. She wasn't just suing me, she was trying to socially isolate me. Then came the HOA angle. She claimed that the incident had lowered neighborhood morale, and that my refusal to cooperate was disruptive. For a brief moment, I honestly wondered if she believed her own story. The same woman who preached about responsibility and community standards was now using the HOA as a shield to protect her son from consequences. What shocked me most was her audacity during our brief lawyer-mediated communication. She hinted that if I dropped the insurance claim and worked something out privately, the lawsuit might disappear. It wasn't subtle. It was pressure. The message was clear. Comply, or prepare for a long legal fight. But the evidence was overwhelming. Police reports, video footage, witness statements, everything pointed in one direction. My lawyer reassured me that the case was weak. But that didn't erase the stress. Lawsuits don't have to be valid to be exhausting. They drain time, money, and emotional energy. That, I realized, was the point. As I sat there reviewing documents late at night, the anger slowly transformed into resolve. This wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about refusing to let someone weaponize entitlement and intimidation to escape accountability. If she thought suing me would make me fold, she was wrong. What she didn't realize yet was that by dragging this into court, she had stepped into a space where facts matter more than volume, and evidence speaks louder than HOA authority. And once that happened, there was no turning back. The courtroom was nothing like the dramatic scenes you see on television. There was no shouting, no grand speeches, no sudden twists of fate. Instead, it was quiet, methodical, and unforgiving in the way only facts can be. HOA Karen arrived looking confident, almost smug, as if she truly believed this was just another situation she could talk her way out of. Her son sat a few rows behind her, avoiding eye contact with anyone, his posture stiff and uneasy. When the proceedings began, her attorney laid out their case with polished language and vague accusations. They spoke about community impact, emotional trauma, and shared responsibility. It was clear they were hoping the judge would be swayed by sentiment rather than substance. As I listened, it felt surreal hearing my own life rewritten into a version where I was somehow the villain. Then it was my turn. My lawyer didn't raise their voice or dramatize anything. They simply presented the timeline, the purchase of the car, the night it disappeared, the security footage, the police report. Each piece of evidence was introduced calmly, one after another, like bricks being stacked into an unmovable wall. When the video footage was played, the room fell silent. You could see the moment recognition spread across the judge's face. The images didn't argue, they showed. Next came the police report detailing the crash, the high speed, and the fact that the driver fled the scene. The judge asked a few direct questions, and the answers only made things worse for the other side. There was no permission, no misunderstanding, no shared fault, just unauthorized use and reckless behavior. The most telling moment came when HOA Karen was asked to explain her lawsuit. Stripped of legal language, her claims sounded exactly as ridiculous as they were. She spoke about stress, embarrassment, and how the situation had been hard on her family. The judge listened patiently, then asked a simple question: how any of that made me responsible for her son's actions. There was no good answer. Her confidence visibly cracked. She stumbled over her words, repeating phrases about community and fairness. But the momentum was gone. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. What had once felt like a power play now felt like accountability finally catching up. When the judge delivered the ruling, it was swift and unmistakable. The lawsuit was dismissed in its entirety. Not only that, but the judge made it clear on the record that the theft and crash were the direct responsibility of her son, and that attempting to blame the victim was unacceptable. The words were measured, but the message was firm. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. It wasn't just relief, it was validation. The truth had held up, exactly as it should. HOA Karen left without a word. Her authority evaporated the moment facts entered the room. In the days that followed, the neighborhood atmosphere changed. The whispers stopped. The looks softened. People realized what had really happened. Her power in the HOA quietly faded, and the story became a cautionary tale rather than a rumor. The experience taught me something I won't forget. Entitlement thrives in environments where people stay quiet. The moment you stand your ground with evidence and patience, it collapses. My car may have been destroyed, but in the end, something far more valuable was restored: justice, clarity, and the certainty that no amount of confidence can outrun the truth. If you enjoy real stories where entitled people finally face consequences, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next.